I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and with me today I've got two vehicles that may be familiar if you've been watching the channel for some time. It's the Hyundai Elantra Sport, which packs a 1.6 litre turbo engine, and behind it the Honda Civic RS, which uses a 1.5 litre turbo. Now, why would this be familiar? This comparison, which we did a couple of years ago, has been the most successful piece of content ever on Chasing Cars. Why? Seems like a lot of you out there are very interested in the small sedan market, especially when they're packing an interesting engine under the bonnet. Now, both of these cars have come in for their facelifts, so that means it's time for a rematch. There's features added in each car, both inside and out. There's not too many dynamic changes, but with a couple more years of hindsight, we'll see how we're feeling about how each of these sedan drives, and then we're going to work out who wins in the 2019 battle of Elantra Sport versus Civic RS. Now, they may be wearing slightly different badges in your markets, however, they are essentially the same thing as is offered around the world. Everywhere, basically, you can get a turbocharged Elantra sedan, and almost everywhere you can get a turbocharged Civic sedan, and they both serve sort of the same purposes. They're both roomy in the back, they've got decent sized boots, they offer good levels of performance and refinement, and here in Australia, they both cost in sort of the late 20s, early $30,000 range. So they're pretty affordable cars to slip into if you may have outgrown something in the class below, or if you're downsizing but don't want to skimp on performance. So first of all, I think we should check out the revised Civic. Now, we've got this really nice orange color. It's a new hue for the Civic. New wheels, we've gone to a graphite sort of design here on the RS. I still reckon the Civic sedan is more handsome than the hatchback, but you can get both. Let's jump inside and check out what they've done in the cabin. So here in Australia, the RS is still pitched as sort of a sporty model within the standard Civic lineup. We of course have the Civic Type R as well, and that's significantly superior in terms of performance, but the RS is also pretty nice. So the Civic cabin, it's largely been the same for the last couple of years, and it presents, you know, really quite nicely. We've got a nice broad dashboard here. We've got a 7-inch touchscreen. That's standard on all cars. Bizarrely though, even at this RS level, which is sort of 32 grand or so, we don't have satellite navigation, but we do have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so it doesn't matter that much. Plus, digital radio is standard. Got a nice leather wrapped steering wheel here, got red stitching in the RS, that's cool, and a really nice digital instrument cluster ahead of that too. Now, you can't do anything like, you know, view a map there, but I reckon the graphics look pretty awesome. We sit very, very low in the Civic, so we got a really sporty driving position, nice, comfortable, supportive seat. We got some electric adjustment for the driver as well, and they're heated. I also like the mix between leather and sort of cloth running down the center as well. That's quite nice. Plus, practicality is good. We got a storage space up here, rubberized, and an adjustable tray between the seats that goes very, very deep. Just a shame that the door bins are a bit tight. But what about room in the back of the Civic? As we know, this generation of Civic is one of the best in the class for practicality. It's basically a medium car, and if you own something like a Honda Accord Euro, or as it was called in the US, the Acura TSX, then you'll find that a Civic sedan can basically replace that completely, because look at how much space I've got. As you know, I'm 6 foot, got another inch or two of headroom, loads of legroom, and tow room is good. Middle seat is definitely a bit of a perch, but 4 people back here will be comfortable. They've got a super supple armrest here with 2 cup holders. No air vents though, that is a bit of a shame in a hot country like Australia, plus the soft touch materials from up front turn into hard in the back of the Civic. Oh well. One thing we certainly can't complain about is around the back here. Firstly, it looks really cool. I think the orange suits it. I really like this spoiler that you get. And underneath this boot, you'll find a significant amount of space. At 517 litres, the Civic sedan it's just one of the most practical vehicles in this segment. The boot's as big as something like a Commodore was a generation ago, so, you know, it's very, very spacious. There is a bit of a load lip though, so you do have to slide suitcases in and out. You don't have shopping bag hooks, but you do have these tabs here to drop the back seats down. Also, there's no grab handle to close the boot, so you've got to put your dirty fingerprints all over the deck, which kind of sucks. Now, I reckon out of these two, the Civic is slightly more handsome, but do let me know down in the comments, do you reckon the Honda Civic sedan or the revised Hyundai Elantra is better looking? Also, let me know just what you reckon you would buy out of these two cars. Now, onto the Hyundai. As you can see, they have changed the styling quite significantly. It's definitely more assertive now. I quite like these really sharp LED signatures in the taillights, and it's also cool that they've adopted this space lettering motif that we also saw on the Sonata. Now we've got a hidden button here. I'm a sucker for those. Opening the boot, now you'll see there's only the small Chasing Cars suitcase in there. That's not because it's actually small, just because it's smaller than the Honda. There's 458 litres of space, still big. Pretty large load lip though, bigger on this car. But what I do like to see is that there's actually a net in there to stop your shopping or whatever from rolling around this pretty cavernous space. And you do get the tabs to lower the back seats as well. Plus, you get this nice grab handle so you can shut the boot without getting your fingerprints on it. Now, around to the back seat. As we saw in the Honda, that car is spacious as anything. What about the Hyundai? Well, it's definitely still good, you know, bigger than the i30, which is the hatchback version of the Hyundai Elantra, but it's not as big as the Civic. So headroom, I'm 6 foot, I've just got enough. Legroom is okay, toe room is a bit constrained sitting behind myself. However, the middle seat is actually more usable in this car because there's no hump in the floor. You do get a flip down armrest. It's not as sumptuous, but you get 2.5 cup holders. And as you'll see down there, there are air vents. So Hyundai has actually had a good think about Australian conditions because it gets, you know, pretty hot here, as I said. Harsh materials in the back though, so that mirrors the Honda, which steps down the material quality for backseat passengers. That's sort of sadly common these days though. Now in the front seat, what we've got is just a really clean design here. You've got a fully integrated 8-inch touchscreen, and Hyundai's software is way better than Honda's. So it's really simple to use. We got navigation, and it's just, you know, it's really responsive and quick and easy to get done what you want to. But you also have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, so you can basically do whatever you want. I love this steering wheel, sporty little wheel, perforations with red stitching. We've also got a red line at the 180-degree mark as well. Feels good in the hand. Plus these sport seats are really comfy. The bolstering's a bit taller. You do sit higher. The driving position's not quite as sporting, but you know, still pretty good. You've got electric adjustment for the driver as well. Keep in mind, neither of these cars have memory seats, just electric for the driver, but they are heated in here as well. This black leather with red detailing. Now this is the Elantra Sport Premium, so it is a slightly higher end car than the Civic, but it's only about $2,000 more. And you get stuff like a sunroof, which is cool. You get wireless smartphone charging, which the Honda can't offer on any grade, so that's nice to see. And as for practicality, you've got 2 cup holders between the seats. Very small bin here. It's not as practical as that Honda, but the door bins are just a little bit larger. Okay, so starting our drive in the updated 2019 Honda Civic. What have we got to deal with here? Well, as everybody knows, the Civic has been around forever. This is the 10th generation of the car, so Honda have had plenty of time to refine this small car into something really good. And thankfully, that's exactly what the current generation Civic is. This is a nicely accomplished, well-rounded vehicle to drive. And it starts with what's under the bonnet, because this generation of Civic introduced some real innovation into basically the standard engine for the car for the first time in quite some years. And it's a 1.5 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol, producing 127 kilowatts of power and 220 newton meters of torque. Now it's badged as VTEC turbo, but you know, really in effect, although it does have those 2 cam timings, it works like a normal turbo 4, so you get all that torque really low in the rev range, and as such it feels pretty nimble and pretty enthusiastic around town, and you make progress nice and easily in the Civic Turbo. Now here in Australia there is still a single overhead cam 1.8 litre Atmo petrol available at the bottom of the range, but most people skip that, which is a good idea, and go right for the 1.5 turbo. Fuel economy is pretty good, so we've been getting about 8.5 litres per 100 Ks in the Civic 1.5 turbo. That's respectable enough. And we find that, you know, it's generally a nice, easy car to drive around town. But when your speed starts building, you encounter one of the Civic's big problems, and that is a lot of road noise and a general lack of noise insulation and refinement. Although the Civic feels pretty mature in a handling and ride quality sense, it is a loud car. It's hard to have quiet conversations with people in the back seat, and that road noise is just kind of ever present. it is definitely increased by the fact that we're rolling on some pretty serious tyres in this car. There's Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyres on both vehicles on this test, which is definitely overkill if I've ever heard of it. But it does mean that you get a pretty loud ride. So if you're looking for a quiet and relaxed car, the Elantra is probably where it's at. However, the Civic claws back a lot of those points with the really pure handling balance that you get in this car. So even though in Australia the Civic RS isn't really marketed as a sporty model, it does feel pretty sporty to drive. It's a really quick electric power steering ratio. The thing goes around corners nicely, it hugs the road, it feels really dynamically sorted. In fact, it feels, quite athletic at times. It'd be cool if you could get the 6-speed manual. That's unfortunately not available in Australia with the Civic. It's a CVT auto only. Now, it's not the best CVT, but it's also not the worst. Most of the time, it just stays out of the way. One area where the Civic really excels is its ride quality. It's got a really nice, damped, comfort-oriented suspension that doesn't lean too much or roll too much in the corners, so it's actually been judged very well. And even though the rear suspension setup is a little bit more basic, you don't get too much like lump or thump from the road surface, and the whole thing feels controlled and comfortable at virtually all times, which is great. So you actually strike a nice balance between sporty handling and a comfortable quality of ride. Safety features were a bit of a bugbear when this shape of Civic was introduced in Australia, because you could only get really any adaptive safety on the very top model, and that included AEB. Thankfully, Honda has partially addressed that, and you can now get it further down in the range. You still don't get enough safety on the base model cars, but on this RS, for example, you do get AEB, forward collision warning, you get the lane watch, kind of half blind spot monitoring system. Ultimately, out of this pair, the Honda Civic is a little bit more laid back, a little bit better in terms of its steering, but also louder and less refined than the Hyundai, which does feel like they've put in quite a bit of effort into making it a bit more of a touring car. That said, for a lot of people, the additional spaciousness of the Civic will be enough to get it over the line. Okay, so now the Hyundai Elantra. Now, it's interesting to note that while both of these cars have been facelifted, especially the Elantra, neither of them are massively different in terms of the way they drive, and in fact, mechanical upgrades were not the focus of these facelifts. But that said, it's still interesting to come back a couple of years later. Tastes change, our preferences in vehicles change, and you can sort of see what's aging well and what isn't. And here in the Elantra, one thing that is aging well is its engine. It's a 1.6 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol. Now, this engine's been around in the Kia Hyundai stable for a while. It makes 150 kilowatts of power and 265 newton meters of torque, which is pretty serious for the small car class, to be honest. You can also get it in the i30 SR hatchback, now called the i30N line, and maybe at some point the Elantra will also be called the Elantra N line, who knows. And here in the Elantra, it does good work. There's lots of power off the line. It feels pretty quick. However, being front-wheel drive with an open diff at the front axle, you can get some pretty bad axle tramp if you really stomp it and the surface is a bit slippery, or if you're going around a corner, it kind of wants to understeer on you a bit. So an LSD would rein that in, but maybe that'd be part of like a future Elantra N, because of course the Elantra is basically the sedan version of the i30, and in the i30 for only about another sort of 7,000 or 8,000 on top of this car, you can get the i30N, which is a very serious performance vehicle. So that's always something to keep in mind. That said, as like a warm sedan, the Elantra Sport is very nice. Now, the gearbox. It is a 7-speed dual clutch. This has also been around for quite some time. Remember, it was on like the previous shape i30 diesel. And it's not the best dual clutch. At the time that it came out, it was basically the same as Volkswagen DSGs of the day. But in the meantime, the Volkswagen group has put a ton of work into making their DSGs better. But the Hyundai dual clutch box has kind of stayed a bit static, and as such, it's a bit rolly. Some of the shifts are a bit weird. The low speed cohesion isn't quite there. But once you get a bit of pace on the books, it becomes easier to work with. And with the paddle shifters, it shifts really quickly. It's just that I reckon the Honda CVT, even though it's a CVT, it's actually easier for ordinary people who aren't interested in cars to understand, but for car people, the DCT and the Hyundai may well appeal. A big difference in the Elantra getting into it after the Civic is that it just feels like a more expensive car, to be honest. I think this is a slightly more complete package. It feels more grown up, more mature, more refined. There's definitely a lot less road noise. There's less noise altogether. And so I feel like, by spending another couple of $1,000s on top of the Civic, you are getting your money's worth in the Hyundai, both in terms of performance and in terms of the vehicle's refinement. However, while the Hyundai is more refined and more polished overall than the Honda, it's not quite as fun to punt into corners. The steering's a bit more remote. The ratio is a little bit slower than the Honda's. It's still perfectly fine and you can definitely have fun with this on a good road, but the crisp steering of the Civic is what really sets it apart for me. In terms of ride quality, they're close, but the Honda is just a little bit more supple. That said, the Hyundai is, it's composed, it soaks up urban bumps pretty well, and especially compared to the Kia Sorento GT, the Hyundai is more comfortable. And for some people, especially people who have commutes down really bumpy roads, that will make the difference. This never feels sort of sharp like the Sorento does. The Hyundai kind of soaks it all up quite nicely. In terms of the safety proposition, the Elantra Sport, which is the turbo variant, comes in two grades, a standard grade and a premium. The premium is the one you want to go for if you want all the toys. So we've got all the good stuff here. We've got AEB, forward collision warning, standard blind spot monitoring, which works in a more conventional way than the Honda's lane watch system. We've got lane departure warning as well. No adaptive cruise control on either car, however, and it's important to note that if you want the Elantra with the 6-speed manual, which is available, you can't get any of those safety toys, which is a bit of a shame. A couple of other things to note. I feel like the Hyundai is a little bit more comfortable to sit in. The driving position is higher and not quite as sporty as the Honda, but the seat itself is really nice and sculpted. Visibility in both is pretty well equal. So really, if your priorities are a bit more speed and more refinement, then the Hyundai will do it for you. If what you're looking for is extremely crisp and pure steering, then the Honda is probably the one to go for. But otherwise, these two cars offer pretty similar virtues. They're both competitively priced, and test driving both, as always, is the answer to find what works for you. So those are some detailed impressions of the Hyundai Elantra Sport and the Honda Civic RS in their revised forms. Now, I like both of these small sedans. I think they're good to drive, they're handsome to look at, and they're comfortable to spend time in. This sort of car appeals because they can sort of do everything. They can carry passengers, they can carry stuff, and they make you look good while you're driving them as well. And they're an example of just how premium ordinary cars are becoming today. But there can only be one winner, and for me, that is the Hyundai Elantra Sport. Why? Because it just feels like a very complete car. For less than $35,000, you have a range of premium features, a great stereo, a very nice interior, good looks on the outside, and a very strong drivetrain to boot. The Civic, I reckon, is a very good looking car. It's cool to drive, but it just doesn't have quite the same level of feature depth at its price point as the Hyundai. But I'm very willing to hear what you guys think down below in the comments. So please let me know, is it the Hyundai or the Honda that takes out this twin test for you? Now, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Click that notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.